halacha that we're going to be studying today has to do with saving yourself, saving your own skin by informing on a friend. And sometimes it's permitted according to halacha, and sometimes it's not. So the halacha in Sif Yud states as follows: Nochri anas, sha'anas Yisrael laharos lo mamon chavero. So you have, let's say, a forceful oppressor who is forcing one Jew to reveal the assets of another Jew. And he basically puts a gun to your head or does some other kind of threat and does a shakedown. But instead of asking for your money, he says, show me where your friend's hidden goods are. Va'afilu onso lahavi lo mamon chavero. And even if, let's say, not only does he ask you for information, but he actually tells you, you need to bring me this fellow's assets. Like, go break into his shop and bring it to me yourself. So, im yesh chashash sakana legufo im lo yishmalo. So he says, if the Jew perceives that his life is in danger, if he will not reveal or give up his friend's assets, ein lecha davar sha'omei bifnei pikuach nefesh. We know that there's a general halacha that nothing stands in the way of saving a life. And so therefore, even if you have to give up your friend's possessions in order to save your life, you're permitted to do so. And we've seen this halacha before, that you're allowed to save yourself with your friend's assets. So that's what he says. You're permitted to save your life with your friend's possessions. Rak sheyitol al da'as l'shalim al pi beistin sheyorlo im chayev l'shalim. He says the only thing that you have to do is when you give up your friend's possessions, it has to be with the intention that I will, God willing, I'll survive this ordeal and I'll go to Beis Din, and the Beis Din will tell me how much I owe as far as compensation to my friend. Because ultimately, yes, I needed to save my life, but my friend is entitled to compensation for that. Right? If my friend's possessions were responsible for saving my life, I have to pay him for that. So that's the requirement. So that's on the one hand, if your life is in danger. Aval im ein chashash sakana leguf v'nefesh ela ones mamon. But let's say there's no danger. Your life is not in danger, but rather the strong arm, in other words, the mafioso guy, is pressuring you to give you money, and you basically want to save yourself by giving up your friend's possessions instead of your own possessions. So he says there the halacha changes. Eino rashai lahatzil mamono b'mamon chavero. That you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to basically say, well, I have a priceless heirloom in my family, and I know the guy is going to shake me down for it, but if I can save my own possessions by revealing where my friend's possessions are. So that you're not allowed to do. Afilu al das l'shalim, k'moshen isbar b'hilchos gazela. And that's even if your intention is to pay back, as was already explained in the laws of stealing. Because when we learned the laws of stealing, we clarified that you're not allowed to steal, even if your intention is to pay the guy back. Similarly, you're not allowed to relinquish your friend's property illegally, even if it's your intention to pay him back afterwards. So then the final statement is Bamed Dvarim Amurim. So when is this all stated? When do we make the statement that you're not allowed to save your own assets by giving up your friend's assets? Kishemamon chavero sha'on salov ha'anas eino tachas yado. When the assets of your friend that the mafioso is pressuring you about is not in your possession. Aval imasro chavero biyado l'shamro. Biyada bo ha'anas va'onso liten lo. So, but if, let's say, a mafioso comes to you, and your friend has given you his, let's say, his jewels for safekeeping. And so you actually have your friend's property in your possession already that you've been watching over. The mafioso comes to you and says, give me Yankel's jewels. Eino chayev lahatzil mamun chavero, ela al derech shenisbar behilchos metzia. So he says, in that situation, you're not obligated to give up your own assets in order to save Yankel's assets. So he says, so in that situation, all right, in a situation where the mafioso comes to you and says, I need money, show me where your friend's money is, and it's not in my possession, I have to give up my own money in order to, even though the guy even asked me for my friend's money, I have to give up my own money before I reveal where my friend's money is. So, however, if my friend's money is in my possession, if his assets are in my possession, then because the fellow gave it to me for safekeeping, okay, so he understands that I have a certain level of obligation to watch over it. But if someone forceful comes in and pressures me to relinquish his property, I am permitted to do so. Because ki aldas kain kiblu min astam, because that's the tacit understanding that anyone who gives up their property to someone else for safekeeping understands that if you get held up at gunpoint and the guy says, give me Yankel's jewels, you know that you're going to be permitted to do so. So in a situation where he says, show me where Yankel's jewels are, there you're obligated to say, I have jewels, don't bother me with Yaakov. If I give you my jewels, will you leave me alone with Yankel's? And if the guy says yes, then you're not allowed to reveal where Yankel's jewels are. But if the guy says, give me Yankel's jewels, and they're in your possession, so then you're not obligated to go any further. You can just relinquish Yankel's jewels, because when the guy gave them to you for safekeeping, he understood that you would, that was the tacit understanding, that you would watch them, but not watch them with your life. Okay. So this is a three-part halacha. Let me just review what we've learned outside. If your life is in danger, and the only way that you can save yourself is through giving up your friend's assets, then you are permitted to do so. But halachically, the Beis Din may assess you for whatever you used of your friend's assets to save your life, and that you have to be prepared to pay him back. Part two is, if the mafioso is threatening you, but you can appease him with money, you're not allowed to appease him with your friend's money if you'll just as easily be appeased by your money. So that's number two. And number three is that that's only true if your friend's money is not in your possession. But if your friend's asset is in your possession and the mafioso is specifically designating that he wants your friend's possession, then you're not obligated to try to appease him in any other way. You're permitted to relinquish your friend's possession right away. Okay? So let's take a look now at the Imrei Yaakov. Nachri anasu adin ba'anas Yisrael. It makes really no difference, says the Imrei Yaakov, if the mafioso is Jewish or non-Jewish. The halacha will be the same. And he pressures you, laharos lo mamon. He says the mafioso pressures you to show your friend where your friend's assets are. Uvazeh kosaf b'shulchan aruch di'im anso hamelech lemoiser zeh ad shiyara lo mamon chavero. He says, let's say the king, a government authority, applies lethal pressure on you to reveal where your friend's assets are. Beheralo mipnei ha'ones harei zeh pater. He says, in a situation where you relinquish your friend's assets to the government, to the king, you will not be liable to pay back your friend at any point in the future. She'irm lo yara lo yakehu o yumisehu. So he says, that's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, that since your life is under threat, or they may injure you to the point of crippling you, so the halacha is that if you reveal your friend's assets, you are going to be totally putter. You won't have to pay at all. V'das hasmasham sifkat yud beis the gambazeshu hu anos mikol makom lechatchila lo yarehu elashim herehu putter mitashlum. And the Sama says that really it's better not to lechatchila. You shouldn't show them, but if you do, you're going to be putter. In other words, it's this, and the Sama says something really astounding. He says it would be better for you to endure punishment, even physical punishment, even getting bones broken, it would seem, than to give up your friend's possessions. So it's not really clear how the Sama can say that. Aval hataz polagalavus virle deshoy lechatchila laharos kedei lihinatzo me'asakana. And the Taz Disma, and he says that if you need to save yourself from danger, from having your life threatened or perhaps a limb threatened, then you're permitted even lechatchila to reveal where your friend's assets are. Shahare Mairi Shim Lo Yarehu Yakehu O Yumisehu. Because after all, we're talking about a situation where they're going to harm you or even kill you. And so the Taz writes, and this will fit this into the language of the Rav Shulchan Aruch momentarily. He says that the Taz writes that even if you give up your own money, you can save yourself from danger, but you're not obligated. Shaharei ha'anas lo hizkir mizeh sheyitin mamun shelo ve'ein al mamono shum chiyuv. So the Taz writes that in a situation where the mafioso designates, he says, I want Yankel's jewels. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to show me where Yankel's jewels are. So in that situation, and he holds a gun to your head, or he holds a knife to you. So in that situation, you are completely permitted to reveal where Yankel's jewels are, and you're not obligated to appease the guy and offer him your own money. Why? Because the mafioso has specifically designated Yankel's possessions, and he's not interested in your possessions. So you're not obligated to put up your own money. So that's the first thing that the Taz writes. Now, Od Kasav Hataz, the Im Ha'anas Mevake Sheyaralo Eifa Nimtza Chavero, then the Taz writes the following. He says, let's say the mafioso pressures you to show you where your friend is hiding out. Afal Pishi Yesh Lechavero Mamon V'Yuchol L'Salko B'Zeh, Mikol Makom Kivin Derotza Lahakoso Ad Sheyitain Mamon. He says, even if you can assess that the mafioso guy, when he meets up with Yankel, he's asking you, tell me where I can find Yankel. And your assessment is as follows. Yankel has money. If I tell him where Yankel is, the guy's going to beat him up until he reveals to him where his money is. He says, in that situation, Amrinan my chazis the damach bidach sumak tfei midechavrach. He says, in that situation, we say, why is your blood any redder than his? And so in a situation where a guy says, if you don't tell me where Yankel is, I'm going to beat you silly, then you're still not allowed to tell him where Yankel is. Because if your assessment is that he's going to give the same treatment to Yankel, what right do you have to save yourself by letting him go and beat up Yankel? It's one thing if he's only interested in monetary possessions. So in that situation, you're allowed to reveal to him where Yankel's possessions are. But if he wants Yankel personally, and he wants to give him a rough over or even potentially kill him, then you're not allowed to reveal where Yankel is, even if it means giving up your own life. Because what right do you have to sacrifice someone else's life in order to save your own life? That you don't have a right to do.
But I just want to clarify. So are we saying that this horrible person wouldn't go to Yankel and say, give me your money or I'll beat you up as well? So would Yankel get the alternative as well? And if that's the case, then why can't you just pass it on to Yankel to have the alternative of your possession or beating up?
So it's a good question, because it seems like the mafioso guy claims that he just wants Yankel's money, that Yankel owes him. So show me where Yankel is, right? So, but the way the Taz presents it is that you assess that the mafioso is going to be roughing him over until he actually surrenders the money. So if it's you having to take the blows versus Yankel having to take the blows, then you have to take the blows. Now, let me just finish reading it because I think he'll clarify it further.
So I'm sorry for interrupting.
Delo ashkechan hetera ba'ones el laharos mamon chavera. We only find a heter that you can reveal something about your friend if you're surrendering his property. Aval im hisker lo shiara haguf shel chavero. He says, but if he's saying, tell me where Yankel himself is, even though Yankel could, in theory, perhaps save his own skin by giving the mafioso money, but you also could get the mafioso off your back by giving him cash. In other words, so this is the clarification. The mafioso says, Yankel owes me money. Tell me where he is. You say, I don't know where he is. He picks up the brass knuckles and he says, you either tell me where he is or I'm going to beat you to a pulp. So he says, so I say to him, why do you want Yankel? Because he owes me a lot of money. Well, how much does he owe you? And he tells you the amount. So you say to him, listen, I'll give you the money. Don't worry. I have it right here. If I give you the money, will you leave Yankel alone? And if he says yes, so then you're not allowed to tell him where he can find Yankel, because basically you're saving. The only heter we have is if the guy simply wants Yankel's assets. Show me where Yankel's assets are. But if he says, I want to have a talk with Yankel himself, so that there is no heter to reveal, because you have to be worried that in the course of his extracting stuff from Yankel, he's going to be harming him as well. Al kain ein heter laharos guf chavero. He says, and therefore there is no heter to show him where he can find Yankel personally. Ach mehasma mashma b'shari bazeh. He says, but the Sma, who's, again, there's two major commentaries in Choshen Mishpat. There's on the Shulchan Aruch, there's the Sma and then there's the Taz. The Sma seems to say that it would be okay. He says, it seems from the Sma that the only time that there's a problem in revealing where Yankel is only where you know that Yankel has no money. And what this guy is going to do is he's going to kidnap Yankel, and he's going to hold him for ransom and make the whole community pay for it. So that is where we say that you only there the Sma says don't reveal Yankel's location to the mafioso. But so again, there's a lot of gray area here. According to the Taz, you're not allowed to reveal Yankel's location to the mafioso. According to the Sma, as long as Yankel has money, you are allowed to. He says, he says, in a situation where the mafioso comes to me and he says, show me where Yankel is, and you know that Yankel has no money, and instead of having him kidnapped and go through that whole process, I can pay him off, so then I'm obligated to do so. But if Yankel has money, it sounds like from the Sma that you are allowed to reveal his location. So basically what we've seen up until now is we've seen two opinions. First, the first one is from the Shulchan Aruch itself, that if you are forced at gunpoint or at knife point to reveal where your friend's money is, you are allowed to reveal where your friend's money is, and you're going to be putter from having to pay back. Another thing that we saw is that, at least according to one opinion, as long as you know that Yankel has money, you're allowed to reveal even Yankel's personal location to the mafioso. So the question then becomes, where, in what context does the Rav Shulchan Aruch say what he said, which is that when you relinquish Yankel's assets, you point to where the guy can find Yankel's assets, you may be chayiv to pay. So that's really what he's getting to. He says, "V'hadam rinan dim anso litein mamon shalo v'herashel chaveru chayav das maharshal dedavka bazehu chayav dahavale laharos mamon shalo." He says it's only when the mafioso guy says, "I need $1,000," and you have $1,000, but instead of giving the guy $1,000 of your own, you choose instead to say, my friend Yankel has a lot of money. Why don't you go to him, or I'll show you where his money is being stashed. And you go to Yankel's stash instead of going to your own. That's where the Maharshal says you're going to be chayiv to compensate. And so you're basically saving your own money with your friend's money. That's where the Beis Din will hold you liable. Aval imansu laharos otros yain v'shemen. V'hera shel chavero patur. Ve'ein tzarach lefaiso b'mamun shalo. Me'achar shalo ansuhu mama. He says, however, if the guy is coercing you, he says, show me where I can find storehouses, warehouses of wine and oil, and you don't have any warehouses. The guy specifically wants to find warehouses of wine and oil, and you don't have those warehouses. And you end up showing him someone else's warehouse. So then you're going to be putter in that situation, because the guy was not interested just in being paid off. He specifically wanted a certain specific kind of property, and so therefore you're going to be putter. So he says this is the first step in trying to understand this halacha. If the fellow doesn't really care, if the mafioso doesn't really care how he gets paid off, he just needs to do a certain amount of cash, and you have that, and instead of giving him your cash, you give him your friend's, so then you're going to have to pay your friend back, even if the guy is threatening you at knife point or gunpoint. But if he specifically asks you for an asset that you don't have, you're not obligated to volunteer to pay him cash instead of that specific asset that he's asking for. Okay? So, or if, let's say, the mafioso comes and says, show me where Yankel's stuff is, right? He hasn't said, I need $1,000. He specifically wants Yankel's stuff, and he holds a knife to you. So there you're not obligated to try to find ways to pay him off. Okay? All right, so I think that we've gotten a little bit of clarity at this point that it all depends on what the demand is that the mafioso is making. If he's making a demand that's non-specific, he just says, I need $10,000, you're not allowed to save your own property by implicating another guy. And if you do, you have to pay that guy back. But if he specifically says, I want wine, or I want an asset that you don't have, or he specifically names Yankel as the guy whose assets he wants, because Yankel owes him money from the horse races or whatever it is. So there you're not obligated to pay off the guy. You're not obligated to give up your own money in order to save Yankel. All right? So far, so good? Okay. Let's go on to the next statement of the Imrei Yaakov. Mamon chavero. You're not allowed to save yourself with your friend's money. Kasov harama da'afilu yisaruhu v'lo amru lo alma v'hera mamon chavero chayav. That let's say the Rama says that a group of guys kidnap you, tie you to a chair, and bring you, to an undisclosed location and start roughing you over. And they don't even tell you why they're roughing you over. He says, but you say to them, hey guys, stop. I'll even tell you where you can find a nice stash of goods. So in that situation, you're going to be chayev because you volunteered information that they weren't asking for. So in the previous halacha, if they said, tell us where Yankel's stash is, and you tell them in order to save yourself from getting beaten up, you're not going to be chayev. But if you volunteer that information in order to stop them from beating you up, so then you're going to have to compensate Yankel for having revealed his stash. And the Shach says, but that's only true if it's not clear why they're beating you up. Like they tied you to a chair for no apparent reason, and it's not like they're trying to shake you down for money. Abel bistama pater, the yuchalomer hayisi saver shemi yasrimosi laharos lahem mama. But if they tie you up and you have no reason, you don't even know why. In other words, it's one thing when they tie you up and they say we've just decided we don't like you, Jew, and we're going to beat you up. So then if you try to appease them with someone else's money, you're going to have to pay that other guy back, the third party back, for the money that you used to appease them. But if they tie you up and it's clear that they're not doing it because they're anti-Semites, but rather because they want money, so then he says, in that situation, if you don't have money, you're allowed to, you can save yourself by implicating your friend's money. So then you're going to be patur from having to pay the guy back. Because in that situation where they're specifically demanding something, or even if they don't explicitly demand it, but it's clear from the context, or it's reasonable to assume that they were roughing you up because they heard that Jews have money, then if you don't have your own money, but you can get them off your back by implicating somebody else, then you're going to be patur. V'da'od, da'afta harama pasak, da'ones mamon lo mikri ones, v'nimshichu achar of chelek me'aposkim, mikol makom hashach masik, da'hol b'yeshomim da'af ba'ones mamon patur, nira di'acholomar kimli kavasayu. So I would say that what he means over here is that there is an opinion that says that when they're only coercing you to relinquish money, the onus mamon lo mikri onus, that if they're pressuring you for money, that's not called pressure. But the Shach nonetheless concludes that you can exempt yourself even in that situation. As long as you just tell them where they can find the guy's money and you don't bring it to them yourself, so then you can basically say, I was being coerced and I was worried they were going to beat me up, even if they didn't lay a hand on you. It is really what I believe he's saying, is that according to the Shach, even if they threaten you and you just reveal to them where they can find Yankel's assets, you're also going to be patur. Okay. All right, so just a few qualifications. Let me just to review what we've seen so far, is that there are going to be different circumstances that are going to define the halacha. If the guy tells you he just wants money and you try to save yourself by giving him someone else's money instead of your own, you're going to have to pay that guy back. If they are threatening you, right? And that's true when they have you at knife point or gun point. If you can just give them your own money, but instead you implicate your friend's money, so then you're going to have to pay your friend back. If the guy at gunpoint says to you explicitly he wants Yankel's money, so then you're allowed to show him where Yankel's money is, and you'll be patur from paying. If he says he wants Yankel himself, so then there's a machlokas whether you're allowed to tell him where he can find Yankel, based on the concern that they may rough up Yankel, and therefore some say, the Taz says that you would have to offer the guy the opportunity to take your money before you implicate where Yankel is hiding. But according to the Sma, as long as you know that Yankel has money, you're allowed to point him to Yankel's direction. And then finally, the last thing that we saw was if they don't tell you why they're roughing you up, you're allowed to assume it's because they want money. And if you don't have your own money, you're allowed to implicate your friend in order to get them off your back, as long as you're doing it because you don't have your own assets. Okay, so that's where we'll hold it for today. Hopefully, this should never be halacha l'maisa for anybody. And we'll finish this halacha mirtz Hashem. Hopefully, we'll finish it tomorrow, and then we'll be able to go on to the further laws of nezek, which are far less violent and threatening than this halacha is.
Yeah, this is a bit difficult to take first thing in the morning. So,
Okay.
all this violence.
Right. Okay. Have a